Okay, so now it's working for some reason. So the only thing is not working from the link. So I have to go on somebody else's phone to.
I have a phone here. Do you want it?
Yes, I would like to be able to post the link of the current live streaming somewhere so at least people know.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you need? You need my thumbprint
I
and...
need I need to be able to go to Facebook of Sant Jordi. If you have Facebook of Sant Jordi or no?
Do I have what?
Facebook of Sant Jordi.
I can get it. I don't. I didn't have it, but I can get it.
Let me see if I can find it.
It's okay. I'll find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
What?
There's something, yes. I just, same thing. I just have little things throughout the day, to keep going.
But yeah, it won't live stream from the scheduled event. I'm sorry?
I am going to be doing a very quick introduction.
Okay, so just be aware of the framing. I think she's going to make an introduction now.
Yes. The Mexican way of eating is so much more sane. Unfortunately, I'm not in a position to follow it. Only wistfully. Yes, and you don't eat a lot at night. So it's better. Yes. Makes sense. For sure. Yes.
Hello, everybody. I hope you can find a seat.
Wait, one second.
It's a little cold to sit on the floor.
It doesn't come. I'm going to have to surrender the seat. He'll kill me.
Are you okay, you guys? Stand up? Okay. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all, and I'm so thrilled that you came out in this chilly evening, to the last in-person event of the Sant Jordi USA Festival of Books, Roses, Arts, and Dragons. We are thrilled to be presenting Jennifer Shyue and Natasha Wimmer this evening in a conversation about the translation of the Enlightenment of Katzuo Nakamatsu. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Sant Jordi. Sant Jordi is one of the most beautiful book festivals in the world. It started as the festival of St. George, the Dragon Slayer, in medieval times. And it used to be a custom for centuries that a gentleman would give his lady a rose. And in the late 20s, the Barcelona Booksellers Guild introduced books into the mix. And gentlemen would give a lady a rose, a lady would give a gentleman a book. This was clearly way too gendered, and now everybody gives everybody books. But all of Barcelona and Catalonia is filled up with book stands and flower stalls, and it's a work day, but it's an incredible party in the streets. And so we're going to try to bring this to New York. You see the roses here. And please don't leave without a rose. That's our gift to you. And so I'm thrilled to be presenting Jennifer Shyue and Natasha Wimmer. Oh, Egypt, William, sorry. Jennifer Shyue is the translator of the Enchantment, of the Enlightenment, and she translates from Spanish. Her work has appeared in The Common, New England Review, and Poetry, and she has received fellowships from Fulbright, Cornell's Institute for Comparative Modernities, University of Iowa, and the National Endowment for the Arts. Natasha Wimmer is the translator of everyone in Chile. 9 books by Roberto Bolaño, including The Savage Detectives in 2666. Her most recent translations are Nona Fernandez's Station Raiders and Sodidef by Alvaro Enrique. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and 2 children. And the beautiful thing is that she was Jennifer Shyue's teacher, so they are passing, she has passed on her skills and lore of translation. So thank you both. Last night Jacob Rogers spoke with Sam Rugger, and it was an incredible conversation. I think the translator-to-translator conversation is a special thing going on. So thank you so much.
The speaker is not on.
Thanks so much, Mary Ann. Is this working?
No.
Turn on?
Yes, I think it's behind. The speaker is not on.
Oh, the speaker.
Okay, Max is here to save us. Yes.
So, thank you so much. And thank you so much to Mary Ann for the kind introduction. And it's really exciting for me to be here with Jennifer Shyue, who was indeed my student at Princeton in 2015, and who has made an impressive career for herself in the short time since then. As a translator and also as an editor and as a writer on translation. I really enjoyed her essays on translation. So I think that you would like to read a little bit first, and then we'll have a bit of a conversation. Thank you, Natasha. Thank you, Archipelago and Sant Jordi and Unnameable Books. Yes, this is very exciting. Many firsts for me here, so. But I'll read from the beginning of the book. This is part of the first chapter. And I guess by way of context, Katzuo Nakamatsu is the title character. He's a Japanese-Peruvian, Okinawan-Peruvian professor who lives in Lima. Augusto Higa Oshiro is also an Okinawan-Peruvian writer who wrote in Lima. But yeah, I guess I'll launch into it. Standing on a pebbled path in the Parque de la Exposición one August evening, Katsuo Nakamatsu looked on at the sakura blossoms. The branches of the small trees, which were scattered around the park and laden with rosy flowers, glowed in the leaden light, filling him with a private joy and, he believed, a secret spirituality. Children played on the green lawn, couples chatted on wooden benches, pedestrians and families walked among the ancient fig trees and sables. He took a deep, contented breath. Yes, the flowers were graceful and lovely. Then he walked toward the carp pond, shifting the angle of his gaze, and still the opaque light stayed the same, and the sakura branches continued gleaming exquisitely. He smoked a cigarette, contemplating his view of the composite, the pond with green water there, the perfume sage here, surrounded by grass, creepers, and the plush sakuras. There was nothing to probe, no forehead wrinkles, no gesture of delight. Indeed, nothing foretold anything, not the lower east sky, not the people walking in the gardens, not the humdrum cooing of the pigeons, not the frogs moaning in the cisterns, until the strange moment when Nakamatsu began to feel burdened, the weight of consciousness, unseen affliction. In the eternity of the instant, in a manner of speaking, the green of the afternoon flickered out, the parks babbling with a race, as if the world had taken flight. The pebbled paths disappeared, no serene gardens, or laughing families, or murmuring young couples, or ponds full of fish. The only thing in the air now was the sakura tree, its branches and luminous flowers. And in that fragment of afternoon, from that imperturbable beauty, Nakamatsu noticed, sprang a death drive, a vicious feeling, like the sakura were transmitting extinction, a shattering, destruction. Facing this unusual, abnormal reflex, Katsuo managed to close his eyes, as if invaded by exhaustion. It all seemed like a dreadful illusion, abhorrent, and without knowing why, he began to tremble, sweating, pallid. shaken to the core, unable to dislodge that feeling of death. He stood paralyzed on that pebbled path, face strained with color, eyes clouded over, breathing slowly. He focused inward, his hands wavered, and nevertheless, the horrendous feeling remained in his consciousness. He waited a moment, a sensible length of time, before opening his eyes. And this time, he could make out, real and tangible, a crew with Akeko faces, marching through the grass under the sakuras, colorful chuyos on their heads, and leather pouches at their backs. Their hunchback figures bundled into suits and ties. They let out grunts and babbled in Quechua, their little mustaches accentuating their wax faces. They were like rag dolls, cartwheeling, tripping over each other, while the festive onlookers applauded and cheered and tossed coins. Uncouth, brutish, crude, he couldn't stand it. Aghast, Katsuo Nakamatsu fled, making his way on a paved path through the gate that opened onto La Avenida Garcilaso de la Vega, looking at no one, face forward, his head trembling, eyes wet with tears, alien to the street vendors selling ham sandwiches and ladling emoliente as he plunged in among the vehicles and buildings on that central artery. He came to a stop on Paseo Colón, faltering, bewildered, unsure whether to cross the road full of minibuses and blaring horns. His body was dazed, and in case the sensation of death had stayed in his consciousness, and an animal fear was hollowing out his belly, which was beset by a violent churning. His throat was parched. He felt faint. Now, aimlessly, he moved through the desolate streets, unrecognizable roads, past suffocating houses, impregnable stairways and doors, closed offices and dark corridors. He had enough restraint left to keep himself from breaking into a run and howling on all fours like a dog. His heart lashed. It was hard to breathe. There was a prickling in his legs. A blazing anguish, a brutal sun seemed to be burning his face, poaching his intestines, boiling on his back, sweat flooding, and the entirety of the street laid out before him, restaurants, vehicles, glass-pane doors, mere meters from him, looked iridescent and yellow, radiated a blinding light in spite of the raw Lima winter sky. This is the solitude of hell, he said to himself, still on pins and needles, his skin burning, absorbing the heat, utterly lost, walking in no particular direction, guided by instinct. Only when he made landfall on Los Monsubalte did he recognize the wide avenue with its three arteries. He could see the silhouettes of the roofs, a few balconies, the walls of the police station, the stony old houses, the hoarse puffing of the trucks, the provincials walking by, and for the upteenth time he checked and confirmed the abyss of feeling alive, stricken, devastated. I think I'll stop there. Let's listen.
That was great, thank you. It's such a striking beginning. It begins with this very idyllic scene, and then all of a sudden it turns into this sort of hellscape. And the whole novel is kind of a passage through the different states of the mind of Katzuo and Nakamatsu. But maybe you could tell us a little, just give us a little synopsis of the book so that everybody has a little context.
I always wish I could just lean on what Archipelago wrote for the write-up for this novel, because I have, we were just discussing, not a ton in the way of conventional plot, but basically Katzuo is struck by this death drive one day walking around Lima, and then is sort of forcibly retired from his job as a professor at San Marcos, one of the major public universities in Lima, and then sort of starts just walking around Lima aimlessly, and is pursued by, voices from his past, the country's past, his Japanese-Peruvian past, and then, eventually finds enlightenment in a market. Not to give the ending away, but I think it's a novel about the past and being haunted by the past, and also alienation. And walking around Lima, it's in many ways a love letter to Lima. That's how I would sum up the novel.
Okay. Wonderful. And maybe tell us a little bit about Augusto Oshiro and how you found him, how you came to him.
So I first learned about Augusto in a book of scholarship written by the professor, scholar Ignacio. He's written a number of books. One about Peruvian writers of Chinese descent, another about Peruvian writers, and then also I think a book about like Japanese Brazilian writers. And I was very actually I was in your class in college, and you had asked us to translate something that hadn't been translated before. So I went to the library and I had spent some time in Peru when I got here before I started college, and I was like, okay, well I've been to Peru. I'll try to. Anthology there was a writer named Sikun Wen, and I was like, oh, this is a Chinese name, interesting. And then, yeah, so that's sort of how I learned about the, Asian diaspora communities in Peru, and then through there, found Ignacio Lopez books, and then, he had a chapter on each of the writers that he writes about. One of them was Augusto. And I first found Augusto's short stories, which for the most part, he sort of has two stages in his literary career thus far. First is like very much rooted in working class Lima, where he grew up, and the sort of language of the street, I think, as he's put it. And then the second stage came after he spent some time working in Japan during the tumultuous 90s of Peruvian history. So after that, he came back and I think sort of reckoned with the fact of his identity. His parents are from Okinawa, and this book is from that second stage. But yeah, I was really struck by his short stories, and then also when I came across this novel, really struck by the headiness of it, and the way it sort of like wraps you up and brings you hurtling along, and so yeah, that's a little bit about Augusto. He has a lot of novels and a lot of short stories, and there's a very marked like split in his career that I think is very interesting.
And I believe you met him too. What was that like?
It was cool. I think I've had the privilege of like talking to or meeting most of the writers I translate. And so once when I was on Fulbright in Lima to learn about the Chinese-Peruvian communities in Lima, but also had a friend of a friend who was friends with Augusto. And so one day we went to his house to meet him, and it was really great to meet him and talk a little bit about like some of the origins of like a short story that I was then translating for an issue of Words Without Borders. And he did not remember meeting me after I called afterward, because I called him a couple of times to ask him a few questions about things, and he did not have any recollection of me being there, but I remember his house, and it was and his little dog, and the book of essays that about his work that he had on hand and very generously shared.
That's interesting, and I think that each relationship that you have with a writer is a different relationship. Depending on the writer's circumstances, or how much they want to be involved, how much they can be involved. But I did want to ask you too about translating Julia Wong Comte, is that the correct pronunciation of her name? Because she's from the Chinese-Peruvian community. I guess it's more correctly called the Tucson Peruvian community. And I was looking at an essay that you wrote about the Asian Peruvian literary community, and it seems that it's not quite so simple as that. There is the Chinese side, the Japanese community, and that they're not necessarily the same. And I was curious about what you observed whether Chinese or Japanese, how their relations are with the general Peruvian literary community, and just anything about working with the two of them in different stories.
Yeah. So I think, of course, we have the label Asian American here in the U.S., but ultimately that's like it's very much a construction. It has a birth date in the 60s, and isn't necessarily a natural construction if you think about it, given the history in Asia of imperialism, etc. So in Peru, I think I come in with my very U.S. lens and thinking like, oh, there's of course going to be a sense of identification between the sort of Nikkei community and the Tucson community, and found out that that was not so much the case. I think it's very much being built now, because there is sort of no matter where your origins are, like the sort of default is, oh, you're Chino. So there's that sort of being lumped together by external gazes. But yeah, I think because the histories of migrations are very different. I think the Chinese one started, I think in 1870, so 50 years before the Japanese one, was very much, laborers, mostly male laborers, were brought in mostly from what was in Canton, to replace enslaved laborers because of the abolition of slavery. And so very different circumstances of the migrations, and that, also I think has led to, different ways that the communities show up. I think because most of those initial migrants were male, a lot of Chinese-Peruvian families are very mixed ethnically, because those laborers married into, Peruvian families. I think one scholar, I don't know where he got this number from, but one scholar estimates that 10% of the Peruvian population has some Chinese blood. So just very different histories. But in terms of the literary community and, within the larger society, I feel like when I was at Augusto's house, he talked about Julia's latest novel, right? I think it's a literary community because it's a literary community, not necessarily because of any identity markers, but it's a very close-knit community. Everybody knows everybody. Everybody knows everyone's business. And yeah, so I guess. Yeah.
I guess I was surprised or not surprised, but there is a lot in this book about the narrator's complicated feelings about being Japanese-Peruvian, and also there's even a little bit about the conflict between the Japanese and Chinese in Peru after World War II, or during World War II, when they were sort of on opposite sides, although living in Peru, and I the book really is about alienation, and I wondered, whether you think that the alienation that the narrator feels is primarily a product of his alienation from Peruvian society as a Japanese Peruvian, or whether it's more a literary, sort of a more general literary alienation. And the way the novel ends makes you think that maybe it really is a social. Socially driven, but I'm curious how you interpret it.
I think that's a really interesting question. I haven't thought about it before. I guess in terms of the two figures that sort of become his beacons, one's Etsuko-ten, who is one of Katzuo's father's friends who came over with him on the same boat or on the same ship, and then the other is the Peruvian poet Maitena Aran. So I guess taking those two as, he starts dressing like both of them and starts seeing Maitena Aran on the street even though he's dead, starts thinking about how Maitena Aran spent a lot of time in a psychiatric hospital, in and out.
That's true, he sort of conflates the two, so
yeah.
It's as if his literary alienation is sort of the same as his political or his social alienation.
Yeah, I think it's for me those two figures speak to a sort of dual thread to the alienation. certainly, it was very difficult for Japanese-Peruvians during the Second World War. And as you mentioned in the book, like there was lots of violence, and the Chinese-Peruvian community sort of, distanced himself as much as possible in many cases, according to narration, by like saying, like, giving away their Japanese-Peruvian peers. Also, I think little known fact is that I think around 10,000 Japanese Peruvians were deported to the U.S. to be interned in camps on the West Coast, as part of the, U.S.'s policies during that time. So, but in terms of what the root of the alienation is, I don't know. I mean, I guess Katzuo attributes it in part to his like Asiatic temperament. Or, I guess I could have translated it other ways, but that's how I translated it. But I think it's also...
It's also the sexuality.
Yeah, which like sort of threads in, because certainly he talks about how his siblings are much, better adjusted maybe than he is, and they're also, of course, their parents are also now on because they have shared parents.
And his siblings are all in business. He is a university professor, so then maybe that's part of it.
Yeah. For sure, yeah.
Does his sexuality play an important role in that?
Yeah, I think it sort of,
It's certainly central to his moment of enlightenment.
Yes, won't give it away. But he's married to a woman named Keiko for a long time, or in his youth, and then she dies pretty early, and I think her late 30s of cancer. And then so he's just, he lives by himself thereafter. But there are definitely these like threads of queer desire that are, sort of bubble up as he's walking around Lima and looking at everything. It's sort of, it's definitely not explicitly queer desire, but that thread is definitely there. Yeah.
So, what did you love about this book, and what did you think was most important to get across in the translation? In a related sense, what was most difficult about the translation?
Yeah, definitely very related, those two things for me. I think I love the texture of language in this book. For me, it felt very much like translating poetry, unlineated poetry, which for me requires a different kind of attention, the feeling for me is looking, holding the book up really close to my face and looking really hard at the words. So that was a joy, and that's always really exciting to do, but also one of the hard parts of it as well, because with most poetry you have shorter units. The lines are a little they are short, lineated. I found myself feeling kind of breathless when I was working on this novel. The chapters were obviously longer than most poems, and and the sentences were just very often endless feeling, just lots of commas. Double-sided. It was both the most exciting part of working on this novel and also the most taxing part of it.
Yeah, the texture of his prose is very distinctive, and the sentences have a lot of series, a lot of, not series just of adjectives, but sometimes of phrases, and the series are not always in parallel structure, which is something that I always notice as a translator. I remember one of the readings that I give to my classes is by Lydia Davis, and she talks about how in Madame Bovary she chose to keep a sentence that was not in proper parallel structure, and the editor made her put a note in the introduction so that people would know that it wasn't an editing mistake. In this case, it's very, you know right away that the sentences are something different, and they become, they get into your head in the way that a very distinctive voice does, and I think that that's a triumph of the translation. But one of the things you say in your afterword, which I found so interesting, was that you had a physical reaction to translating, especially the last chapter. And you also talked about the way when you're translating, sometimes you sort of act out what you're translating if you're trying to figure out how it would happen physically, and that's something that's happened to me too. And I know you draw on some other essays that talk about that, but I thought it might be fun to talk about a little bit about that.
Yeah, for sure. It definitely helps me to visualize. Like for me, reading and translating are both very visual in my brain activities. So definitely like sort of being able to picture Katzuo's like characteristic, like sort of vacillating gait was really important. And also, I think beyond the body, like thinking about Lima and the parts of Lima that were named in the book that I had been to myself was also important. Like I, at one point passed through Parque de la Exposición, which is in central or downtown Lima, and like, took some silly photos with a couple of friends, and another time met somebody there before we went off on walking. And so like being able to picture those places was also very important to me. There are parts of the city named in the novel that I never went to just because they're considered not as safe for people who are clearly not from Lima. I think place plays a really important part in this novel as well, and like being able to sort of overlay my own memories of places onto what Katzuo was doing and walking around was also really enjoyable part of the process.
Yeah, I always love a good street scene in a novel, and this novel is just like one street scene after another. He's just wandering around the city constantly. Let's see, what else did I want to ask you about? I guess I mentioned this a little bit before we sat down, but because his prose is so distinctive, I was curious how, what you were thinking of in terms of closeness and looseness in your translation, and where you tried to stay close, other places where maybe you were a little bit looser. That's something that I think about a lot myself as a translator, so, and I talk about a lot as a teacher, so.
Yeah, I was thinking when you were saying earlier about the parallel structure, like I'm generally a stickler for, grammar. I have freelanced as a copy editor, so I really had to like shake that loose a little bit for this novel, because even for Spanish, which is generally more permissive with like what we call comma slices, there are a lot of commas in these sentences. So yeah, I definitely had to like sort of like try to shake that instinct off. A teacher during my MFA, Arona Ji, who's a translator from Turkish, I think once said that with a difficult text, like the translation can teach you how to read it. So like I sort of kept that in mind. I think I went a little easier on readers in the first few pages and like had a few more periods and had some more conventional sentence structures to sort of try to ease people in to this really like heady narration. I think too, yes, like I think, I mean, you see this all the time in your classes, definitely was true of me, like when you're first starting out as a translator, it's very tempting, especially for languages that share an alphabet, to like really stick close to the syntax and like not move things around. But with time, you like maybe you set it aside and you come back to look at it without the original, as I think you advised us to do, and you realize, oh yeah, like I definitely need to unstick more from the original, and I knew was going to be very important for this novel because it would be very easy to maybe go too far in one direction, either like trying to flatten the sentences too much or stick too closely to the syntax of the Spanish, which is very distinctive. So I thought a lot about semicolons versus commas in translating this novel. Definitely converted some of the Spanish's commas into semicolons to try to help readers chunk like units of meaning a little more easily. And
sometimes the pauses are just not in the same place in the two different languages. That's sort of my justification, thinking about the pause of. I'm sorry. And it is amazing how, no matter how long you translate, each time you start a new book, you have to convince yourself all over again how loose you really have to go to be faithful And that's sort of the the constant reminder, at least for me as a translator. So I just wanted to, how are we doing on time? I do want to leave some time for questions, but I did just have one last question that I wanted to ask, which is, sort of back to the beginning question. I'm just curious, what made you keep going as a translator after, your first few classes in translation? What was it that drew you to translation and that made you decide to pursue it seriously, which is amazing?
Well, I was very inspired by your class. It was sort of like a lightning bolt for me to like have the first assignment and be like, this is really exciting to sit there, and because I'd done some creative writing as well, and I was like, this is like all the best parts of trying to write fiction and like very few of the parts I don't like. I love, the playing with language and sort of this feeling of like doing a language puzzle and like thinking about words, and then so yeah, from there I was sort of inspired to try to do more translation classes. I did one with Karen Memerick, who's also here, or I think more than one actually, and yeah, I think it was something that slotted really well into my interest in terms of like thinking about multilinguality in general, and language in the sense of like writing, and then I sort of like the opportunity to do an MFA in literary translation sort of fell into my lap, and I had put too many eggs in too few baskets and didn't have exact postgraduate plans, so that was also very exciting. So I went straight from undergrad to MFA in translation, and then that just really solidified this as something that's like always going to be very nutritive and exciting for me to do. And I now am not a full-time literary translator. I have a day job at an ad agency, but it's like always exciting to turn to my translation work, and it's that the thing that I like dedicating my energies to. I even am trying to become a morning person, even though I am very much, I think, baked into my genes and a night owl, so that I can wake up at like, ideally like 5:45 and like do some translation and then start my workday. Hasn't entirely worked out yet.
I'll be very impressed. So, does anyone have any questions? Marianne?
I'm curious. First of all, I dread the semicolon in Spanish. I prefer the comma. But your comment reminded me of when I was 20 years old and read Los Misadventures. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, what the relationship of Higa is to the other Peruvian writers that aren't mentioned, that aren't his sort of doubles in the book, and the Peruvian tradition. And the reason I think of that is that I remember in Las Misadventures there weren't even commas. So I think that this is something that was also there in terms of the flowing story.
Did everybody hear the question? The relationship of Oshiro to other Peruvian writers who are not mentioned in the novel?
He's very much, I think, a Peruvian writer. He, I think, cites Julio Ramon Rivero as an influence. When I talked to him, when I met him, actually, I'd gone back to do his master's in literature and was doing his thesis on Julio Ramon Rivero. And yeah, I think, and he's, as in his first stage was very much part of a group of writers that's called Grupo Narración. That was very much about capturing the language of the everyday person, the person who spends a lot of time out on the street, the sort of rougher language that you don't always see in representative novels. I think hopefully at some point we'll be able to publish so sort of his literary journey through Lima that he wrote up. But lots of all the key Peruvian writers known outside the country, and also, you know, that are the great Peruvian writers, very much influences for him. And like for many other Latin American writers, I think Faulkner is also a big influence. But his influences are wide ranging. Like for this one short story I translated, he talked about how it was inspired both by a story by Flaubert and also an Augusto story. So, you know, just like the gamut.
I have another question. What? No, it doesn't matter. Where does this novel fall in his oeuvre? Because it seems as though it's later.
It is later. It was published in Spanish in 2008. He's been publishing, I think, since the 70s. He's written a few novels since then. He's still quite prolific. But yeah, it's definitely squarely in the second half, or like the second stage of his literary career.
Anybody else?
Yeah. Sorry to monopolize.
No, we can always wrap it up early and have some wine and talk about it.
I think we're.
That sounded like hint, hint.
No,
What was the question?
can you repeat?
What was my favorite translation puzzle, like puzzle to solve in the book? I think, well, maybe this is, you know, something I could ask you too. I mean, there are a number of words that are sort of left in the Spanish, and also, yeah, so I guess mostly like street names, but also, and there are also Japanese words that he sprinkles in that I did not attempt to translate, and I think, you know, would have been a bad idea to try to translate. But I mean, in your translations of Nona Fernandez, words like, I think I wrote to you about this at one point, like the word degollado, which means like, yeah, like to have, you know, someone who's had their throat slit, and reference to crimes committed by the Chilean dictatorship. That was a word you left in Spanish in your translation. And I found, I mean, it's a striking word, it's striking to the narrator. It's also like doesn't have an amazing one word equivalent in English, but also just like it's very, like, for me is very visceral because of the way the word like hangs in the back of your mouth when you say it. But yeah, yeah, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, you know, in that case, yes, it is a word that is discussed in the book, in the novel, and so that makes it easier because you can explain it in the course of the character's own, you know, coming to terms with it. And as you say, it does have a very particular sound, and, you know, throat slit with a dash is just not the same. So, yeah, I didn't, you know, I felt that all the things that you left in Spanish were, you know, worked well, and the things that were left in Japanese were good too. And I like the fact that there was the mix of the Japanese and the Spanish, and that gives you a little flavor of, you know, of the sort of cultures combined.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure when you mentioned that the pauses come from different places sometimes in Spanish. And I wonder how important is it to not just keep the writer's style, but some of the rhythm of Spanish in the English? Or are you just purely trying to make it sound like elegant, beautiful English?
I think it's a good question. After a certain point, like put aside the Spanish and just looked at my drafts on their own. And so I can't say I was replicating rhythms of the original or rhythms of the Spanish language, but I definitely was trying to have some kind of rhythm in the translation. And I think that's often what ends up happening when I'm translating poetry or very lyrical language, is like, I know there needs to be attention to sound and texture. I'm maybe not going to map out everything that's happening line to line in the original, but you know, I know sort of how it makes me feel, and I know sort of what I can try to do, like the sort of feelings I can try to evoke in the English. So yeah, I guess like I couldn't tell you where the pauses are necessarily different in the English and Spanish, but
I can add something to that too. I mean, you know, usually each sentence is a unit, not always, because sometimes you break up sentences. So, you know, at least to that extent, you're mirroring the Spanish and you're getting the same amount of information into the same unit. And chances are that, you know, some of the rhythms will be the same. And usually the information and the order, information comes in the same order in English. Usually it's not, you know, English and Spanish are quite close in that sense. So, I rarely find that you're completely rearranging a sentence. And I think a lot of translators pay a lot of attention to the beginning and the end of sentences and try to, you know, end on the same note. And so the sentence has the same trajectory, even if it doesn't, you know, pause in exactly the same places, if that helps.
So we'll continue the live streaming and we'll be back in 15 minutes in the same live stream.
Oh, you look great. This is our Sant Jordi
I'm going to put it here, pointing at the...
I mean, it doesn't even exist until...
Would you please?
We're going to have another, we're going to have a break for events and for drinking and eating, and then we're going to have another wonderful panel. So please stay. Thank you.
Most people know that. Not everybody knows that. Yeah. See, I can talk. I just didn't want to do an introduction on the spot. Yeah, exactly. I can't do it. I can't do that. That was really great. Amazing job. I read her other. I mean, she's great. Obviously, she's just brilliant. I fell in love with it when I just read the excerpt. Yeah. It's very boring. Oh, it's a planner. Just like in it reminds me of like Kurosawa film. You've seen that? No, I haven't. Oh my gosh. It's sort of right. And it's a beautiful film. It's really, really good. And it also kind of shifts gears and becomes kind of childlike. It's just a beautiful film. It reminded me of weirdly T.S. Eliot Prelude. Oh wow! Interesting. That was a little weird, but that's cool. No, it's like there's one little bit of it that's like almost a synopsis of the novel. Like the part that goes. You watched the thousand sordid images of which your soul was constituted. They flickered against the ceiling when all the world came back and the light crept up between the shutters and the sparrows in the gutters. We had such a vision of the street. Oh my God! Yeah, that's amazing. I think T.S. Eliot would have been a planner in the right moment. Yeah. Well, maybe. Yeah. But he shifted gears. He's a gear shifter. I think it should be more. It should be more of this. Wow, we've got an amazing crowd. Yeah. Great. Cool. Yeah, Jennifer's yes, you should sign books. Yeah. They have a bunch up front, and there's some on the table. Yeah. No, we should. I'm not going to announce the books for sale. People know that. Let them enjoy themselves. You can write on the sidewalks. There won't be people by as many. That neat? Except for that would have been. I'm used to it.
A way to end the night.
Yeah. It's really cool. Yeah. Did you know Mary Ann?
Look unobtrusive and
You know, I need to
want to look unobtrusive and
otherwise I
Yeah, I've been bad in a lot of directions because I just moved to Toronto. Yeah, New York. So I've been like kind of neglecting a lot of stuff. Emotionally devastated. And Enrique's. Yeah, so Enrique found a publisher. It was like Alvaro Enrique. Yeah, sorry. What do you mean for Rhea sent me something in Spanish. Like a few months ago. Oh, I don't know about it. Okay. I'm just really guilty because I'm just really spending time.
That makes me wonder about Riverhead.
Oh, well, let's hope.
I mean, it's not exclusive to Riverhead. Actually, I just saw recently that he's a bit surprised that I didn't know about this before. He has another two goes.
The one
At the same time, the one I just
Bruna and
You're the last one.
he was kind of lost.
Who's translated that one? That is odd that you didn't know about it. You didn't tell me. You would turn it on. What's her name? What's the book that you got? I didn't. I really did not even. I did not even crack it. It was a PDF, so that's part of the reason why I didn't crack it. PDFs.
You know, my grandparents were from Lovers.
I was thinking you would visit them as kids. Yeah. It's changed a lot.
Yeah, well, you know, it was lovely.
Yeah,
My grandfather.
It's all very fabric and orange, and I think the detachable collar was invented in Toronto, and it was a relic of the 1800s, and then it became a.
You tell me the most beautiful lake.
There's beautiful architecture. I mean, I did not. We were renting 2 floors of a house, and we had neighbors and roommates. Everyone are renting out the basement. So we were thinking about Montreal, and my partner is going to be 70 soon, and he was like, "This is going to be complicated." Medical this time. What does it mean when you go to Canada? It seemed kind of overwhelming when we really got down to it. Okay, well, up there, you know, we spent time in Canada, different parts of Vermont. We loved it, but it just didn't seem like any city there felt tired, right? The place was right, camera on or off? I can't hear it. It's a lovely city. Close to a lot of close to Adirondacks.
So it's on the train.
It's on the train, and it's
That's right. In fact, I think
no, Albany. For us, Albany is like 15 miles from Toronto. But anyway, it's I've been in New York for 20 years. 22 years. Yeah, I mean, I'm from Kansas City. Yeah. Western experience. But you've traveled all around. You've been living in Latin America.
yeah, sort of. I mean, I lived in Spain actually. My parents were in Portugal for a while. After I went to college,
So, where in Spain?
It's a very good publishing house. I have to.
I do understand the RFI thing.
All right, have a sit.
We have Kaija Straumanis of Open Letter Books is going to be beaming in from Rochester. There she is. I don't know, if somebody has a book here that you probably don't want to lose, a book and a pen?
That's mine. That's
Okay.
mine. I don't want to lose that.
All right.
Hi, Kaija.
Okay, so we might need to raise the volume. Yeah, that should be good. All the way up. Okay. Okay, Kaija, can you raise your mic volume on Zoom? All the way to the top. No. So to be able to hear her,
But
I don't think we're gonna hear it in the live stream.
not very well.
Shall I hold the microphone to the screen?
To this, let's see.
Do you want to sit here?
Yeah, also.
There's a lot of chairs.
That's better. That's better.
It's working, Kaija. She's
Far away
going
to
to
see the
look
books
for
on
my...
the shelf.
Just like
Well...
You said it was working now?
Yeah.
Well, if I hold the microphone to the screen, somehow it works.
Okay, I will try to plug in to
No, this is perfect.
computer.
This works.
But uncomfortable. Oh,
Well, you will need to put the mic anyway.
nobody else could.
I'm not entirely sure how this works.
Oh, perfecto,
Let's just
perfecto.
this way. I'm happy to be your mic. We have to shift with the punches.
I know what she's trying to do, and it's so complicated.
No, that should be okay. She looks professional.
Gotta
about
get
it.
in the right plug.
Kaija, if you could just speak into the computer, and I'll hold the mic on you. Now we don't hear anything.
Max, much better. Max and Mary Ann will be doing most of the speaking.
Max, I hope Max will be doing most of it.
We hope Max will be doing most of the speaking. Are we all ready?
Yes.
Yes?
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
great. I don't know, I can't see anybody, so I don't know what's going on. But were there already any introductions done, or?
No, we hope that you will do that.
Okay, absolutely. I'll just be reading what's on the website then. So thank you for, I hope, all 300 of you who have squeezed into this lovely garden. I can't see anyone, so I'm just assuming. Thank you for joining us tonight, for sticking around for this last event of the evening of the Sant Jordi Festival in the US. With us tonight is author Max Besora, who was born in Barcelona. He has a PhD in literature from the University of Barcelona and started by giving poetry recitals and then publishing poetry before switching to novels. And what a switch indeed, because this book, The Adventures and Misadventures of Joan Orpi, is quite the novel. So glad to have you on the novel side of things, Max. And then we also have Mary Ann Newman, who translates from Catalan and occasionally Spanish. She has translated fiction by Kim Monzo and Joseph Maria de Sagra, pardon my pronunciation, essay by Xavier Riventos, poetry by Joseph Carner, Maria Calise, and been many more. Mary Ann has received, but I apologize, the Sant Jordi, the J.D. Cedros Award and the NACS Award for Catalan Studies, so we are in very good and very expert hands with these two. And most recently, the Kaija Straumanis Award in 2022 for her work as a translator and as an advocate for Catalan culture. And for fun, she's doing what she's doing this week, which is curating Sant Jordi festivals. So we are very, very delighted to have her on board as well tonight. And I am Kaija Straumanis. I am the editor at Open Letter Books, which is based here in Rochester, New York. We published Max Besora's novel in English. And I also translate from Latvian, but tonight I will be steering the conversation with these lovely, lovely two people. And we're going to start off by giving a little intro of the book. I am not the only person who likes to compare this work. The full title, which is The Adventures and Misadventures of the Extraordinary and Admirable Joan Orpi, Conquistador and founder of New Catalonia. And I'm not the only person who has compared this to Monty Python meets Don Quixote, and if the title doesn't give you those vibes, then the first several pages will immediately. This is, and it's a testament to the translator Marife Letham. This is one of the funniest books in any language that I have ever read, that I think most of you will ever read. And I'm hoping that the copies made it to the store tonight so that some of you can go home with some tonight. Otherwise, get your hands on it however you have to, because this is a phenomenal, phenomenal piece of work. We were in Barcelona in 2017 having a presentation, a PowerPoint, given to a bunch of publishers who were there from various different countries, and one of the authors they spoke about was Max Besora, and Chad Post, our publisher, and I were watching this PowerPoint, and we're like, this PowerPoint is like, it's tailored to us, because every single author, and this book in particular, and I remember being in that presentation on my cell phone, looking up the Catalan publisher, Malas Adibus, and finding the publisher's email address and messaging him in the middle of this presentation being like, can we meet you? We want to talk about this book. So we're so thrilled that it's part of our list. And the reason we are here tonight, or one of the reasons, is that we would like to talk about, or have Max and Mary Ann talk about the influence of North American writers of the 60s and 70s on Catalan literature in general, and also with Max, with your work, because this book is a bananas romp of languages, of dialects, of countries, of travel, and I can only imagine what you have put into this from your own literary experience. So yeah, I think to open up, I hope that was an okay little background, but I'd like to open up by asking both of you, Max and Mary Ann, to sort of, let's start with talking about what is Catalan canon, and then we can kind of go from there.
I would like to ask you one question though, Kaija. Can you hear me?
Uh-oh. No, I can.
No, but who was sponsoring that get together that you attended?
The ever amazing Ramon Yule Institute.
That's what I thought. So I want to take this opportunity to thank the Institut Ramon Yule and the delegation of the government of Catalonia, without whom we would not have done any of the Sant Jordi Festival, and certainly this event this evening. So yeah, all of that work that goes into presenting writers to potential publishers and all of that. Catalan literature is on a level playing field with other literatures thanks to this work. So anyway, applause to the Institut Ramon Yule.
Yes, very much is they are some of the nicest people we've ever worked with, and every single one of them are very dear to us.
There's something about doing it for love, I think. That. So Max, you want to talk about the Catalan canon?
Yeah, why not? I feel like a chicken in a farm here. A little bit. It's like being in Spain again. No, it's really cold here. Huh? And so, yeah, the Catalan canon, that's weird because so Catalan literature is pretty not very known in the world, right? And not even for the Catalan people. And then like this is because there's always the same names over and over. But then there's also always there's a canon, and then there's always a contra canon. Can you say that?
Yes.
A parallel canon, which I'm more interested always because it's in the underground, no? And it's the people who failed to be success in literature, and then I like this kind of literatures because then the writers can risk more because they don't have anything to lose. And meanwhile, if you have success and you are a successful writer, you have all this ego thing and you believe you're the best, and then you write probably the best shit in the world. No, not always. But that's the main thing, no? And me and my editorial, Malas Herbas, precisely what we do is to search this contra canon and these authors who were hidden by the official literature history, and not only in Catalonia, but because I don't believe in like Catalan literature or Peruvian literature. I think literature is like an international affair, and you can have relations with many authors from the present and from the past, and it doesn't matter their culture or their language, but what matters is the similarities that you can have with other writers, right?
I think the Sant Jordi Festival does that.
It's that, yeah, it could be, yeah. But for example, when she was talking about the translation and how when you translate a book, you create another book, kind of. And for example, in my opinion, many times I've been more illuminated by Catalan translators who translated books from other countries like Brazil or North America or Africa or whatever, and they translated into Catalan, and they created like a new kind of Catalan that often the Catalan authors doesn't do that because they are so attached to language. In Catalonia it's not like North America. We are very attached to grammar and to the Pompeu Fabra norm, right? And this has a historical and political explanation, which was the protection of language. Otherwise, Catalan is always in danger to disappear. And so, but doing this protection of the language, also create like the paradox that writers also have to protect the language, and so they always, or many times, they write by the book, by the following the grammar and following the law of the language, and from my point of view, I think literature is always looking the other way around. No, it's like for the search of experimentation and playing with the words and with the language, and always finding new words and inventing new words, and that creates this paradox in Catalonia, that when you do that, and I do that, I mix language, I often mix different language and neologies and stuff like that, and then the critics, they don't like that. They don't like, because they want that people who write in Catalan, they write in the normal Catalan, in the legal Catalan. Otherwise, the language will disappear. There's this fear all the time, and I don't know. Yeah, we can talk about that.
Well, actually, I was
You want to
thinking,
read?
I think, yeah. No, it's not that I want to read, but I think you've really set up the reading of your book in a perfect way, because you're going to hear through Maravillism, you're going to hear how Max Besora breaks the rules of language. So, but stop, because we didn't plan this, stop me when it's going on. Chapter 1. There was a preamble. There is a preamble, and there's a wonderful epigraph, which is in Latin, which is, there is no book so bad that it doesn't have something good. That it doesn't. Thus begins the story of Joan Orpi, indubitably some sort of premonition of his later life of adventures. It is said that while Joan Orpi's birth was a bit strange, it was highly spectacular regardless. And if you don't believe me, listen to this. It all began in the small Catalan town of Piera, one evening of the year of our Lord Jesus Christ, 1513? 630. I went to Catholic school. I did learn to read Roman numbers, if I've got my Roman numerals right. When an old ailing pigeon, wet from the falling rain, flying hither and thither from clouds filled with electrical activity, soared through the trees and sown fields, made 3 shaky circles around the church bell tower, and floated through the heavens of smoking chimneys in a prodigal final flight, until its wings could take it no further, and finally, amid hoarse glook-glooks, it landed clumsily on the angular sill of a window, where, agonizing in horrific pain, it consumed its last moments of life in absolute sepulchral silence. How did you say glook-glook? You said glook-glook. That window belonged to the home of the Orpis, a family of respectable wealth and notable local pedigree. And inside the room, the light given off by 3 candles revealed spread-eagle legs covered in varicose veins and hair, trembling from the effort of bringing a new soul into the world. Mrs. Orpi was about to birth an infant in such a way that would become legend, and fodder for numerous sessions of rumor-mongering in the town of Piera, at least for the duration of Sunday afternoon. And there's a really pretty little drawing of Piera. Push! For the love of God, Eulalia, push! Push! Shouted old Orpi. This child be driven by the devil, my beloved, she bellowed, the birth being such great torment that she couldn't help dire prognosticating. The woman had flooded the bed with excrement, blood, and other fluids, and was straining her nether regions to get the baby out of her womb once and for all. So loud did she bellow that it seemed the sky would crack and splinter into 1,000 shards. Alerted by the hollering, a throng of curious neighbors had gathered outside the house and were pointing their fingers at the window of the Orpi's home. Even me bottom is said to explode, she shrieked, her eyes rolling back in her head. Aye, God's loaves and fishes, I'm dying hither. Come now, woman, don't scream so. Thy serenade of hurtling and shouting shall bringeth all Piera here. Shh! Quit thy rubbish talk, Papette, ordered the woman. This birth art an executioner come to take me. Peace, be quiet, prithee, woman, prithee. Any moment now he'll be out in the world, a perfect right genius, with a mustache and all. And who would have thou believe my baby art a boy child, big lump? Asked the woman, pushing. Come now, woman, can't you see we needs an heir to tend these lands? Always with your mind on coin, vile leech, whilst here I be'st dying of excruciating pain. My wish is a girl, and she shall be called Maria, hither, thither, and yon. Over my dead bodikins, firstmost a male heir, it's the least thou canst do, countered her husband, and we shall name him Joan, as my father, who art in heaven, whether thou like it or not. I'll respect thine pain, at least respect mine legacy. If that be true, then thou art often worn all those whores of yours, since out of respect thou should liest only with your wife.
Yes.
while she's giving birth.
Do you want to hear how the birth happened?
Is it a girl or a boy?
I think you should. One more page? Okay. Daren't he commence that old song and dance, Eulalia, bellowed her husband, feigning indignation. Let us get this birth over with, or I'm like to faint. Oh, yeah, sure, when I raise the subject of the bawds ye frequent in Barcelona, out comes the broom and flish, flash, thou changeth up the subject right quick, ye swine. Eulalia, cry thee mercy, said her husband, kneeling by the bed. Quick gabbering and push, for the love of all that be holy. Just then, at the 11th hour, the town midwife rushed in. She was in such a rush that she came wearing just her nightgown and slippers. Let us see if we can't get this here show on the road, milady, she barked with macaroni cowl, as Eulalia's husband crossed himself. But despite the best efforts of that expert in births, natural and unnatural, it didn't seem the child would be born that night, nor that the storm had any desire to wane. Quite the contrary, the sky spat out its fury harder than ever, with clouds colliding violently and creating brutal electric jolts that fell upon the earth, cleaving mountains, burning forests, and splitting trees in two. So great was the storm that one of those streaks of lightning fell right atop the Orpi home, hid in the chimney, snaked down like a bulimic cosmic worm, and burst through the fireplace into the living room, where it hit a dog in the snout. The electrical charge set its pure canine instinct into motion and it bit one of the servants who was stretched out on a straw bed. The young man leapt up from the pane and banged into a shelf above him, and from the shelf fell a pot containing 2,000 Catalan reals, 10 gold maravedis, 30 billion castellanos, 40 of Barbarossa's pfennigs, 8 liards, 500 deniers, 5 croats, 200 pounds, 11 1/3 trentines, and a bunch of counterfeit money, plentiful as it was throughout the country in that period, of which one coin went flying and, tracing a perfect semicircle, landed in the mouth of the woman giving birth. A curious detail. Throughout this entire chain of circumstances, the lightning's electrons had transferred from one object to the next when they touched, and the coin the woman swallowed sent an electric charge through her entire body, helping her with the final push needed for her to expel, with a shy, "Oh," the newborn from his maternal cave, whilst the coin emerged from her nether slot in a wholly ultra-natural way. Pluff. Thus was born Joan Orpi, the poet.
Wow.
That is Mara's translation.
Yes, thank you for reading it. It's so, yeah, I love it. And this is, I have to keep muting myself because my cat is freaking out, and I'm freaking out because I love this book. It's so funny. And I want to know, Max, how did you get to this point? How did you get here? How do you write something like this? Like, who are you reading? Because, you know,
When were you pregnant?
Even with this paradoxical attempt to break the Catalan mold that you were talking about, it still has, and I am acknowledging Mara's translation, and that's why Mary Ann, I'd like you to maybe speak to the translator's point of view, but the book still has this old world elegance to it, even with phrases like "over my dead body, kids," and things like that. Just the how what are you reading from the 60s and 70s, and what are other Catalan authors reading to get you to this point? Because it's so good.
It is, and I also want to add part B to that because there's a lot of erudition in the book. So how do you decide when you're going to, be drawing on kind of the readings of the medieval times and how when you're going to be just getting down and laughing and joking around?
Well, I don't often do historical novel. In fact, it's the only historical novel I did. But every time I write a novel, I have different ideas in mind. And one of the ideas of doing this one in particular was to criticize the historical novel. And because historical novel is made thinking that you are reading history, and that's not true. But people are reading historical novels thinking, oh, I'm going to learn something of history without studying history, right? But it's not. So one of the aims of the book is to do that. So there is like 3 levels in this book of narrators. And there's the modern narrator, a teacher who finds the book, which is also a genre in itself, the manuscript found. And then there's the second level in the 18th century about the soldiers who tell a story to each other while they are in war. And they tell the story of Joan Orpi, who happened a century before. So there's 3-level historical times. And each historical times criticize the previous historical time. Meaning that every historical event that we read is practically, probably is false. It didn't happen that way. But it's built that way, so we have to believe what it's being told, right? And otherwise we will be lost. And people, they don't like to get lost. And that's why people have faith in religion or things like that, right? And otherwise it's nihilism, and it's a big black hole in front of you and behind you. And I like that. I think art, it's that big black hole, and you have to be willing to travel this black hole of nothingness and create something from this nothingness. And then the other line to do in this novel was, like all the other novels, it's language. The plot of the novels, it doesn't interest me as much as the language. And so for me, a novel is a festival or a party of language, and then it comes the plot. But in this case, it's a real plot. So this guy exists. It really exists, and he exists in the 17th century, and he went to America, and he raised the new Catalonia in the middle of the forest. And I thought that was a very interesting story, because nobody knew that story in Catalonia. And it was very similar to the story that we have now, like Spaniards trying to, get our little nation, It's like, I don't know if you know Asterix and Obelix, the comic books, French comic books. It's a little bit like this with the Catalans and the Spaniards. And it happened the same with Orpi. He went there and he raised this little civilization in the middle of the forest, and then the Spaniards came and take him away, right? So it was like, oh, it's a repetition, because history is a repetition, right? We always do the same mistakes. And I think that was also interesting to play with the past and the present, right? And the other line of thinking in the novel is the line of the novelty, la novetat. In literature, we were talking with some people from the radio in Catalonia that when a book comes out, it's like everybody's like, it's a new book, blah, blah, and everybody's crazy. But then when you publish a book, 2 months after, this book disappears. There's unless you have a big success, which is 1 in a million, and it didn't happen to me. And then so you publish a book, and 2 months after, this book is nowhere. And so people are attached to this thing of the new thing all the time, and we are slaves of novelties. Can you say that?
Novelty, yeah.
And I think that's crap, because literature, I'm interested in a novelty, but I can be interested in a book made in the 17th century, and for me it's a novelty too, because I never read it. So what is that? What is the present and what is the past? It doesn't exist, right? And I think we are floating in unknown space and time. But people have to be attached of the things that we know all the time, otherwise we get lost.
Do you have a question? I have a question, I have a small comment, because I think there's a novel that should be attached to Joan Orpi, and that together they will provide a commentary on modern Catalan literature. There's a writer, Avelí Artiz-Gené, who was known as Tisner, who was exiled in Mexico and became really attached to Mexico. He was one of the people. He established a literary magazine there in Catalan, but also in Spanish. He established a publishing house in Spanish with his cousin, I think, Pere Caldés. So, the Catalan exile in Mexico was very important. But he wrote a novel. He wrote a historical novel that also once meant to be a commentary and a critique of Bernal Díaz del Castillo, or even of the chronicles of the great Catalan chroniclers, Ramon Muntaner and Jaume el Conqueridor, and the whole kind of heroics of colonization and of battle, no? And so this novel is called The Words of Opoton the Old, and it's about an Aztec expedition that goes and discovers Spain, or the Iberian Peninsula. And what he's trying to do with that, now Opoton is an intellectual, and he's fascinated by everything he sees there, and he just wants to establish, talk about the things that he's learning. But basically, what he's saying is, it's the warriors and the capitalists who always win out. So even if that isn't part of your, it's another thing we were going to talk about was American writers and Latin American writers influencing Catalan writers. But you want to talk about that?
Sure. Well, I read that book in school and I like it, but it's not like a direct influence. But now that you say, probably, all the books that we read in our life, it's an influence somehow, and somehow it comes all together, right? But
this was sort of a marketing thought. I'm thinking we should republish, because there's a whole generation who don't know.
Translated?
No. But we should publish The Words of Opoton and tie it to you.
Sure. Yeah. But yeah, I was more influenced to do this book. I was more influenced by John Barth and the Salt Wheat Factor. I don't know if you read that book.
Yes.
Yeah, you like it?
Yes.
Well, I like it too.
And it sounds just like the Salt Wheat Factor,
exactly.
Same concept.
But what John Barth was doing there, and all the postmodern North American authors,
Thomas Berger,
actually, and is like rewriting, the old books. With the irony of the avant-gardes, right? And this operation is what I like to do with my novels. And that's something that has been lost in the Catalan literature nowadays. It was in the 70s, because there were the 17 authors in Catalan literature. They were influenced very much by the Nouveau Roman of Rob Griet and stuff like that, but also from the North American tradition, like William Gaddis, Thomas Pynchon, Barthélemy, Robert Hoover, and Barth, William Gass, and but there were only a few authors. There were not very much people, maybe 4 or 5. And it was only the decade of the 70s, and then in the 80s came, and and all this disappeared. And it started this kind of realistic literature, which is the other way around of postmodern literature, of metafiction and playing with words and whatever. And then it started this kind of literature of, kind of a realism, because also the Catalan country needed this kind of literature that talks about the country and with a regular language, and it's kind of this little socialism in it without the socialism, right?
Where do you see the influence? Would you talk a little bit about the influence?
No, what I'm talking is like this kind of literature, of postmodern literature, it disappeared, and it not only disappeared there, it disappeared here too. of course, David Foster Wallace and all these people, it's considered kind of a postmodern, but I don't think so.
I just want to ask you because the people here don't know who it influenced in Catalonia.
Oh, influenced the first Kim Munzo, who Mary Ann Newman translated, but only the first Kim Munzo. I don't think the second Kim Munzo was influenced by postmodernism. And Sarsanelas, for example, the first Sarsanelas, because then Sarsanelas also changed it to realism. And a lot of authors changed it to realism. And it was not only about ideology or anything like that. It was also because the publishing houses tend to think that nowadays, even John Barth, the Sudwick Factor, is not published now. You have to search the publication because it's difficult to find. And so this kind of literature, it was like, like put it aside, or cast aside, in pro of a kind of a realism, and which I don't think it's bad necessarily, but I think it's like in cinema or music, different styles can live together. But it seems like the big houses, the big firms, they try to sell kind of a literature, and that that it has to sell somehow. I don't know the mechanisms, or I don't know why one thing sells more than the other. But
no one knows.
Yeah, no one knows. Oh, okay.
Why was 2019 the year of the adult coloring book? No one knows. But really quickly while the microphone is maybe by the screen, I wanted to ask as a tangent. So Max, you're mentioning authors like Barth and Gass, and were these authors? I mean, obviously someone had to have read them in English first, but were they primarily being read in English, or were they being translated into Catalan for Catalan consumptions? Like how were you accessing these authors, and how might the authors like the Monzos and other contemporary Catalan authors, how are they getting these postmodernists?
Well, that's the thing. They had never been translated into Catalan, and that's why they never influenced Catalan authors. Probably. I mean, Munzo, he read it in English, of course, but the majority of Catalan authors, they read in Catalan or in Spanish. Thomas Pynchon and some of them, they were translated into Spanish, some books, but not all, and very underground thing. And so I think that's the reason. This postmodern line, they never was really an influential thing in Catalan or Spanish literature.
So how did you come across them? Because
I read it in English.
Well, yeah, no, but I mean, you're a different generation, so how were you drawn to it? Because your contemporaries are not.
Oh, yeah, but I don't read contemporaries. I live in another time, and I like to, I play jazz. I listen to, I read Robert Crumb, the comic books. It's from my father, and I don't know. I don't read Catalan literature from nowadays. I read literature from the 70s. Of course, I read some of contemporary literature, but I'm more interested in the authors in that time, or the avant-garde in the 30s, because I think they were more adventurous in terms of writing and experimental. And I think nowadays everybody's very domesticated, like pets. That's what I believe.
Pets of the market.
Exactly, and that is because of the market, and everybody thinks the same, everybody dresses the same. I mean, what's going on?
My poor publisher here is, do you want to say something?
About
the markets?
I don't feel offended at all, because what Max is describing is exactly the sort of, it's exactly one of the sorts of things that we look for in literature. So I loved it. For example, when Max, you said earlier that for you a novel is the festival of language, and then the plot comes next. I mean, we are so drawn to authors who write like you and who write like Kim, and not only, but also the classics like Vidreda and I was going to say, you're saying Max, you're from another time, but there's so many other people who I think identify also as being from another, like you have an audience. And so I think that's so interesting that within these smaller cultures and languages around the world, that we all sort of finding each other in the end.
I think as a translator and as a cultural activist, if we want to say that, I think one of the interesting things and one of the things we try to do with Sant Jordi and one of the things, for which we count on Open Letter and Archipelago is once, English is a monster, English publishing is a monster, right? Or the standardization of American and British writers and all of that and people who write in English. But once you translate something into English, it levels the playing field because Catalan literature is on the same level as Hungarian or even Spanish. So the importance of translation in that sense to hope that we will find the audience for the books. But it takes away the kind of, it's not important because it's from a small language. That, people want to read Kimunjo or Max Besora because they found him at Open Letter. I think people follow the publishers. Open Letter and Archipelago and New Vessel are, have fan clubs. So anyway, that's my thought.
Well, I think, if you have success with one book, that doesn't mean that in 20 years this book will have the same success, or people will remember your books or whatever. So that shouldn't worry you. You have to write just because you want to write, and then if you get published, well, lucky you. And then I think it's better not to have expectations in any way, because Don Quixote, for example, it was famous for a century, but then the next century nobody liked it, and then they like it again the next century, and that's like this. I mean, literature, it has like these up and downs, and maybe there's a book from the 40s that nobody knows, and someday somebody republish again, and then they become the bestseller, whatever. So you never know. You don't have to think about that. But the big firms, they think about that. They think about the novelties and the right now and the success right now. We have to be successful, and that's nonsense. And and that's why that's nonsense to talk about contemporary literature. Everything is contemporary. I mean, a book from the 17th century can be more contemporary than a book from yesterday, right? And that's why I wrote that book, because that book meant to be wrote in the 17th century. But it was written in the 21st and it was published that century, but it doesn't matter. It could be in the 17th century too. So we can travel space-time.
Shall we ask if you have questions?
Hi, I have first a comment, because what you're saying about Catalan and English forms. I translate from Galician, and I have never read a review anywhere else where at the very end of the review, it's a very nice review, and then at the end they say, and the orthographic correction was very well done. And I just thought, who cares? So I respect a lot of that. But my question was, do you have any translations into Catalan that you find particularly meaningful to you, or that were particularly impactful as a reader?
Yeah, there's the Joyce Ulysses from Maya Frey. I don't know, and that book for me changed my view of my own language, because Maya Frey invented, like Joyce, neologisms and different words in order to translate the Ulysses, right? And so he bring to Catalan, the translator bring to Catalan new possibilities that if the Ulysses it wasn't translated, that kind of possibilities wouldn't exist. And so for me it was very like an illumination, no? And there's another, for example, there's a writer from Brazil that I don't speak or read Brazilian, so I read the translation. It's called Guimarães Rosa, the writer, and they wrote Sertão Veredas, which is one of the most famous books in Brazil, and it was translated by Xavier Pla, I think it's called, and he's amazing. And this translation, because Guimarães was the James Joyce of Brazil, kind of. And so the operation is the same. The translator had to invent words in order to translate that book into Catalan, because it didn't exist, that words into Catalan. And the same thing with Carlo Emilio Gada, for example, which is a writer in Italy that's not very well known, but for me is one of the best writers in Italy. And so it's the Joyce of Italy. And what happened? Another crazy translator, he had to invent like a new Catalan in order to translate that author, because the author originally, he used different forms of Italian in the whole country, right? And invented also languages and stuff. And so, but I don't remember the name. But that guy was very criticized in Catalonia because he invented a Catalan that was not in the norm, you know, in the Pompeu Fabra, which is got in the grammar, Catalan grammar. You know? And so, and he was very criticized. But I love it. I love it. I think that kind of translations really embrace like a new Catalan and a new language, and a language is not a dead thing. You cannot preserve a language like a nation, you know. No, you cannot do that.
Or a nation.
You know, exactly. Not even our nation. You know, a language is something that mutates. It's like energy. It doesn't die. It transforms into another languages. You know, because we all come from Latin, and so it's normal that everything spreads and transforms. And so it's impossible to maintain a language the way as it's, you know, there's a rule and stuff. I don't believe that. And I think writers have this mission to, you know, to create these new languages in order to be more creative. That's my opinion.
Well, and as to address the question of translation, I think that has been one of the roles. When in the 19th century, the German theorists of translation were saying we have to translate from other languages into German because German is too parochial, and you know, so they were and even the in Catalan at the turn of the century, the Bernat Metge collection, which was translating from Latin, was trying to, you know, enrich and broaden and break through the kind of everyday language of Catalan by I mean, that is the beauty of translation. It imports, if it's a good translation, it breaks through the habits, the kind of daily habits of language.
Yeah, but that's also another contradiction, because sometimes the translators are more creative than the same writers, and it's like, which is good, for me, it's okay. I learn more from the translators than from the Catalan writers to write Catalan language. That's weird, right? But it's what it is, you know. The translators had to invent new languages in order to translate these crazy writers in their original languages.
And then you were like a sponge.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But the Catalan writers were like, no, don't put that comma there. No, don't put any word there, because, you know, we're going to break the whole nation. And this fear is real. This fear is real. And it's because it's a political thing. You know? It's like, you know, that Spanish language, which is a huge whale, they're going to eat us. And this fear is real. But it's like this for centuries, right? But Catalan language didn't die. It's still alive, right? And if there are writers who write in Catalan, it will be alive anyway. So I don't know where this fear comes from. I think the fear is like to do something new. You know, people are afraid to try new things. And I think, for example, Spanish for me is a real nice language because it brings two cultures, different cultures, 2 or 3 or 4 together, and it creates a new language, right? And I think that's the beauty of language for me. You know, when you want to preserve a language, you're killing the language. And it's the same with literature. You know, there's no Catalan literature, and literature is like a universal thing. Like, I don't care if it's American or Catalan or whatever.
Yeah. No, it's true. Go on.
Oh, what about Katzuo?
I'm just,
Do you agree?
yeah, I suppose not fully, but I do enjoy hearing this point of view because that's what makes publishing literature from around the world so freaking interesting and so exciting because it truly is a mixed bag and it's such a pleasure to see what is out there. And Open Letter is obviously not the only press that does that, but I always from day one have been grateful to be part of this literary translation publishing world. And I'm also now far more excited for the next two books of yours that we'll be publishing, that Mara will be translating, to see what sorts of games and what sort of festival you're throwing for us in those books.
Would you both talk about the books that are upcoming?
Can I say more about them than I do? I know the titles, and I know one of them is the Lamosa, it's like a sort of pulp.
Oh yeah, it's a pulp novel. Yeah, the fake muse it's called. Yeah, and it's about the characters who. It's more like a Pirandello thing, you know. The characters of the book start a rebellion against the author. Yeah, but there's also other things like shooting and stuff. And then there's a campus novel, which is a genre that I really like because it doesn't exist in Spain. You know, the campus novel. Do you know the campus novel? No.
David
I
Lodge.
mean, everybody who studies in the university, they should know. There's no campus. There's no campus in Spain, exactly. In Europe, almost. But it's an Anglo-Saxon genre. I did that as my PhD, actually. And
What did you talk
about the Anglo-Saxon campus novels.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, there's a bunch of. No, it was more like a history of the university from. Well, I started from the ancient Greek. You know.
From Salamanca to the present.
Yeah, exactly. It was because the campus novels, it's a way to criticize university, and you know when you do a research about the university criticizes society, right, or studies society, but who criticizes the critics? Nobody, because they don't like to be criticized, right? But then when you research, you find these campus novels, and there's a lot of critiques about professors and the life of students, and you know the whole of all of this. Actually, Joan has a novel called the Giles the Goat Boy, which is every writer in North America who had a job in the university wrote a campus novel. You know? David Foster Wallace and Jonathan Lethem, who is the brother of Myra Lethem, who is the translator of my book. It's all connected. And then you can travel space-time when you connect all the dots.
So, is there maybe one more question? Max is the only one who has a heating lamp, so I imagine you're all getting a little bit.
Yeah, I'm trying for a long time.
I'm sorry? Okay,
Yeah, for Max.
but shout.
Yeah, for Max.
I have first a comment. I'm Brazilian, and I really appreciated it when you were talking about the book that was translated, or the email translation from Brazil, and you said Brazilian as in the language. When you were talking about Brazilian Portuguese, I really agree with that. Just calling it Brazilian, because at this point it's like who goes to Portugal? You know, you do. Yeah, you're the only person I know.
That's not true. All the Brazilians go to Portugal. I know. I have friends in Brazil.
Okay.
Everybody wants to go to Portugal.
I don't really pay attention to Portugal. You know what I mean? They have their moment. Question. Yeah, I notice in the way that you kind of talk about your writing and your views on literature and kind of, you know, being an author. Are you an anarchist by any chance?
You got it. Thoroughly Catalonian.
What do you mean by anarchist? I don't put bombs, man. I'm not a terrorist. Well, I think literature can be a bomb, you know? And in that way, you can be an anarchist. But you know, I'm not an anarchist by a book. I'm maybe a primitive anarchist. I'm against all technology, even this microphone. I hate myself.
You should stop using it.
Yeah, but that's not exactly an anarchist. That's more a Luddite. Yeah, I'm a Luddite. I don't know.
Sorry, Gaia.
No, but what we do with the independent publishing houses, at least in Spain, I don't know here, is to go against the system, right? And against the big firms who are like wormholes, agujeros negros, who are eating the little publishing house, no? They're like, and they're eating the little publishing house, and then, you know, suddenly you don't have the space to say what you want, because the big firms, you know, they censorship what you say. I mean, I experienced that myself. I gave in delivered the manuscript to a couple of these big firms, and they try to change things, you know, like, you should say that, you shouldn't say that, that's a little bit offensive, you know, but like subtle, but you know. And I say, well, fuck you. I'm not gonna, you know, I prefer to work as another job and to publish in the independent publishing houses who really, they are free to say whatever they want, you know. I think that's important, you know, to say what you want and not to be censored. And then the money will come somehow. You can rob a bank. There's a lot of
anarchist thing
things
to do, by the way.
Well, on that note, in favor of, we love small publishing houses, we love independent publishing. We are thrilled to have been working with Archipelago and with Open Letter and with New Vessel and with Harper Via, which is a kind of little publishing piece of a big publishing house, and all of these beautiful books that you have been publishing. So thank you, Max. It's wonderful that you were here. Max is on his way to Omi Ledig House.
Okay.
Yay. Yay for residencies. And thank you, Kaija, for joining us on screen.
Thank you so much for beaming me in. I'm so sorry I could not be there in person to freeze my butt off with you guys.
But the cat and the child made an appearance, so we...
Where's the child?
We saw that he was on screen for you. Well, thank you so much, Kaija, and thank you for publishing Max Besora and Kimonzo and Merced Rodureda, and yes, more to come.